All right, welcome back to the Lost and Found podcast. In this episode, I have a conversation with Dr. Brandon Nappi. He's a lecturer at Yale Divinity School, and he has the intellectual depth that you might expect from someone that is a lecturer at an Ivy League university. But also, what I really love about Brandon is he has this deep felt wisdom from someone that has participated in the practice for decades. I had intended to ask some questions about his story and how he got to this point. But as it was, we really just got lost in the flow of conversation. We were talking about paradox and tenderness, love, mystical Christianity, spiritual pluralism, a real beautiful topic. So I hope you enjoy this. If you would like to find Brandon, there'll be links in the description. And also, if you want to connect with me, there'll be links for that there too. All right, that's it from me. I hope you enjoy this podcast with Dr. Brandon Nappi. So, as I was saying before I hit record, your content came across my feed. It was actually something in relation to the paradox. And I thought,
Oh,
I think about that a lot myself, really going beyond the mind to embrace the paradox. It seems to be the mind that dichotomizes and eventually pathologizes. And as I read it, I was like, oh, this person speaks to me. So I went over to your Instagram page and I was taking a look through. And I thought, wow, I really want to have a conversation with this
ah,
person. I felt the depth, but also in the way in which you shared your content, it felt like, you know, you as a teacher, it felt like your character itself was educational. I could feel from you. So that was really the
oh,
call to want to have this
oh,
conversation
goodness.
and just share that in the podcast.
Oh my goodness, Sabri, thank you for seeing that. I hope that, gosh, I hope that could be true for all of my moments of teaching. I think that if I teach nothing else, it's paradox. It has to be, because if it's not paradox, then I'm at war with myself.
Mm.
And when I'm teaching, I'm inviting you into a kind of war, right? Whether it's fighting the shadow, or the soft parts fighting the hard parts, or vice versa. Um, for whatever reason, is it our evolution? Is it our culture? We tend to think in terms of binaries, and there's a kind of temptation to think that if we huddle on either side of the paradox and live there, then we'll be safe. Um, but of course, the invitation in the spiritual life is always to embrace um, both and. Right. This
Mm.
was this came to me. Many teachers teach this way, of course, but in my own life, through the wonderful teaching of Richard Rohr, the beautiful Franciscan who's still around and still teaching, even through his journey with cancer. But there's been others in my own Christian mystical tradition. Meister Eckhart has been a great teacher of paradox. Jesus, of course, is a great teacher of paradox. The Buddha is a great teacher of paradox, and I've been very influenced both in the Zen tradition, the Christian tradition as well. But any great wisdom tradition, sooner or later, is going to need to embrace paradox as a way of teaching. Otherwise we explode. Otherwise we go to war with ourselves or others. And especially in these moments, we see how real that temptation is. It's not just a metaphor, right? People are dying, people are fighting, families are falling apart. And so this way of paradox is the way of integration and healing. And it's what I'll spend the rest of my life teaching, as I spend the rest of my life learning, right, Sabri? Because this is like, we're learning as we're teaching, and we're teaching as we're learning. So thank you for seeing really what's at the heart of everything that I'm curious about.
Yeah, I really feel that. And actually, this behind me is a visual representation of that. I feel like a lot of people
Oh,
are
yeah. Tell me about it.
almost in this like bipolar split here. Is it this or is it that? And really, it reminds me of almost like Hegel's dialectical model.
Dialectic.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, of thesis, antithesis, and then actually, what's the third point? What's this uniting
Yes.
point where actually the two are not separate? Well, they actually eventually they meet each other, and something that I learned quite recently that really, just kind of blew me open was that Jesus is the translation from Greek to English somehow became repent for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. But that word in Greek was metanoia, to go. And I know that's understood as like a change of heart, but it literally means go beyond the mind. And I can't help but think it would have been meant that way, that invitation to go beyond the mind, which creates this split. Because beyond the mind, we find this place where there really is no separation.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you for honing in on one of the most powerful passages in all of the Christian scriptures. I can remember being a divinity student, and we had this famous and beloved and erudite Professor Harry Attridge. He's recently retired dean of Yale Divinity School, scripture scholar, and he employed the Socratic method in the very large introduction to New Testament class that all of us divinity students here at Yale needed to take. And so he would call on one of us at the beginning of class, and then just like in kind of typical law school fashion, at least here in the States, at one point in time, you were it for the whole class. Every session, every question was pointed at you. There were about 100 of us in the class, and he called my name, and he said, "What is the center of Jesus' teaching? What is the one thing that he repeats more than anything else?" And I mean, I had no idea. I went for love your neighbor, which felt like a strong answer, but in fact, not the correct answer. And as you named, it's repent, for the kingdom of God is at hand. And yeah, we have no real good English word for this, as you point out. Um, it's this invitation to transformation. Not just in mind, of course, but in body, in spirit, and it's a cellular um, kind of shift. And of course, you also name it really beautifully that there's no separation. In fact, because the kingdom is at hand, it's within you. This could be translated in several different ways. You're able to live your life differently because there is no separation between you and God and one another and creation and the universe. I had this Zen teacher who was a Jesuit priest, a Catholic priest. Father Robert Kennedy has written at least a couple of beautiful books about the convergence and the overlap between Zen and contemplative Christianity, mystical Christianity. And we were in the midst of this 5-day silent retreat, a session, a Zen, very formal, long retreat, intense sitting, 8 to 10 hours of meditation a day. And of course, we're all in silence. And he would stand up to give one Dharma talk toward the end of each day. And I can remember just yearning to hear a word, right? We're so kind of addicted to language in our culture today, right? It's language everywhere, messaging and information. And I was in some ways detoxing. This is my very first silent retreat, detoxing from all the language and clearly addicted. And I just wanted to hear a word. And so he stood up. I remember just the excitement, the rush in my body, like, oh, finally I get to hear something, someone say something. And he said, "There is no separation." And then he sat down. I was like, damn, that's it. It was very early in my journey. I was like, God, you got to give me more than that. And I've been trying to unpack that, to live from that for the last 25 years.
Mm. Yeah, that's beautiful. A couple of times when you mentioned, Meister Eckhart and mystical Christianity and contemplative Christianity, my ears pricked because you know it's. I know a lot of people that belong to the Christian faith. That apparently the fastest growing demographic is people who identify as spiritual but not religious. And I think there's a lot of people that identify as religious but not spiritual. And for me, I mean, I suppose if we were to go off the original meaning of religion, of religio or religare, to reconnect, I just understand that religion originally would have been about that spiritual connection. And it seems like that there's a lot of people that I know within the Christian faith that seem to have really divorced kind of religion from the deeper spiritual contemplation and and spiritual life, maybe the spiritual path. So I just kind of wanted to double click on you mentioning um, Christian mysticism or mystical Christianity and Meister Eckhart is something I'd really like to open the conversation into.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, yes, I mean you mentioned the etymology of religion as religio, to connect, to bind. Um, it ought to be those practices, those rituals, those symbols that remind us that we are connected to the divine and to one another. Um, yeah, it seems inevitable in the course of humanity that every religion will inevitably lose touch with the founding Enlightenment experience of its founder and will need to be renewed and rediscovered and recalibrated throughout the ages as systems ossify, as patterns develop, as religion in many ways in the West has become a kind of club, which is why many have left it. Because if it's simply a club to belong to, a status symbol, a way to maintain various structures in society, um, then it's lost its usefulness. Its usefulness is to point us to the experience of the infinite that's both within us and around us and beyond us. If it's not doing that, and certainly if it's just upholding capitalism or a kind of prosperity gospel or American foreign policy, um, then over time it will be revealed for the bankruptcy that it is. But of course, especially in this moment, people are looking for answers and they're looking for certainty. And if you are addicted to certainty and answers in these uncertain times, and who could blame you for those quick fixes, then there's plenty of churches around that will promise you answers and quick fixes and prosperity gospels that will make you feel good momentarily, but will ultimately maybe fail to deliver over the long haul. So yes, I discovered mystical Christianity in college through Thomas Keating's centering prayer, through my own experience as my church janitor. I mean, I was a kind of a pretty ordinary Catholic second generation Italian American growing up in the 80s and 90s. We went to church because everybody went to church in my family. No one was terribly committed to meditation or reading scripture or being terribly knowledgeable, or certainly most of my family wouldn't recognize the conversation that we're having now. And everyone just sort of went to church, and I got a job because I needed one in high school and in college. And it was in the silence of the empty church, even more than
Mm.
in the full church, that I discovered something that I don't have a word for: luminous or numinous or sacred or mysterious, or right, the kind of emptiness that's also full. Right, here's bumping up against a paradox. Let's call this the presence of the sacred. And I thought, I want some of that. Who is it that can help guide me to that? And I was in Barnes and Noble. I'll never forget. I was 18 years old. I mean, I know there's still brick and mortar bookstores around, but God, they seem few and far between these days. I was actually in a bookstore, and I'm going to speak metaphorically, but this is how it felt, Sabri. It was like this book by Thomas Merton flew off the shelf, kind of Hogwarts style. And it was called New Seeds of Contemplation, and it was about this amazing monk from England who had come here to the United States and lived in New York City and was an atheist, but found God, and retired to the most strict, silent monastery in the United States and Kentucky. And he had the same question that I did. he was reading all these mystics, having these profound experiences of God, Meister Eckhart, Teresa of Avila, Francis of Assisi, and others. And he said, I want to do that. Where do I go to find this? And at his time, he couldn't find anyone to teach him. And luckily, I stumbled on centering prayer, the kind of Christian version of meditation, mindfulness practice. And Thomas Keating's book, Open Mind, Open Heart, lays out a really simple, kind of pragmatic manual on how to sit in silence before the divine and surrender your life to this incredible mystery. And after I don't know, almost 30 years of doing that, I'm still at it. And it's not always easy, and I don't always want to do this particular practice. But my wife will tell you I'm easier to live with with this practice. I'm kinder. I'm a better listener. I move through imperfection much more gracefully, and my ego has a little bit more of a looseness, a loose attachment to the things that I once gripped on so tightly. So, this mystical path, this contemplative path in Christianity is not as well known as some more loud and boisterous and arrogant, frankly, paths. But this is the one that has really nourished my heart, as well as Zen, as well as secular mindfulness practice, as well as being in nature, right? There's so many paths, and we can walk them all simultaneously.
Yeah, I think that's something that's beautiful about a true kind of spiritual pluralism, where we can, take practices from um, different schools of thought and apply them across, like the contemplative practices that are maybe more synonymous with Eastern traditions, and apply them into, Christian teachings.
Absolutely, and that's sort of how I've approached Zen. Zen is a kind of brilliant light that has shined and illumined so much of this wisdom within Christianity that had been forgotten for me, or that I was just simply not in touch with. And at the end of the day, of course, truth is one. When I'm out watching a sunset, there's no Christian sunset. There's no Buddhist sunset. It's just the sunset, right? And so it's this fundamental unity of wisdom that is what I'm seeking, and I'm always just amazed to discover it in so many places. And so that's, Richard Rohr might call this the perennial tradition. What is true throughout the ages and in countless places. And so that's just felt really at home for me. I know that some people really want to go deep in a singular tradition. I respect and I honor that. Some people feel like they need to go wide in many traditions. In my life, I have a few traditions that have really nourished me. And gosh, I'm really thankful. I'm really thankful. And I think this kind of pluralism, as you're naming it, is going to be even more needed in the days ahead, especially as we experience, at least in my country, a kind of circling of the wagons, a kind of neo-traditionalism that wants to say, there are people who are saved, there are people who are damned, there are there the holy ones, and the rest of the world that needs to be annihilated. So in certain circles, this isn't just an academic discussion. Sadly, blood is being shed across our country, and so I'm hoping we can find a more generous, a more healing, a more magnanimous way of acknowledging the work of spirit throughout all of humanity. Because, gosh, if we can't gather around our shared humanity, I don't know what we can do. And I think it's so important when there's moments of chaos, we have to go back to our shared humanity. And it's been an intense, week here in the States, and with lots of violence. And so much of my teaching these days is about inviting people back to their shared humanity. We can disagree about so many things, but we have this beautiful flesh and bone
Mm.
in common, and it's sacred. And gosh, the safety of our world depends on our mutual honoring of this shared experience.
Yeah, I think that's so well said. And the way that I will sometimes talk about this, or and certainly think about it, is can we recognize the shared what that we are, rather
Uh,
than the idea of who? The who and these ideas and labels and concepts and structures of the minds, but either beyond or beneath that, the ground of being that we share in common. Can we find that in each other? Can we find that and actually and I actually I will I think for a lot, a lot of people kind of consider spiritual practice might be something that you do in the morning where you take half an hour. But one of the most beautiful things I find in my own practice is when I go to busy places, it's to really enter into the depth of presence and see that shared what in everyone. And to know that without knowing the who and your story, that I really can enter into a deep reverence and love for the what that you are, knowing that the what that I am and the what that you are is the same what.
yeah.
And then let me be curious and in the delight of learning about the who, even if those ideas are different.
Oh gosh, yes, absolutely. I love that sense of you, or the possibility of beholding a community of people. I do this often before I go to teach. I'll go into a public space and just be with folks and listen and overhear and watch and remember. It's so I mean, every great spiritual tradition is an invitation to remember.
Mm,
In Christianity and in Judaism as well, it's to remember your belovedness. Remember that you've been created by God and chosen. In the Buddhist tradition, it's to remember your Buddha nature.
mm,
There's this quality of remembering who you are, and who you are is part of something bigger, right? And it's not this identity, and gosh, this is a moment where we're really getting stuck on identity. I feel so blessed and honored. In a few weeks, Loretta Ross, a professor here in the U.S., is coming on the Leaders Way podcast, the podcast that I get to host. And she has, as a Black woman and scholar and survivor of trauma, and written this wonderful invitation to calling in amid this calling out culture and this canceling culture that's become so toxic in our world. She courageously says that our identity is important, but it's not ultimate.
ah,
Right. In the same way, your ego isn't bad. The ego is not the bad self. This is, again, the kind of binary we often
yeah,
get wrong. The ego is just it's true, but it's just not ultimate, right? I'm a man. I'm 50. I'm a dad. I'm an American. Um, all those things are true, and that's part of my self identity. But of course, it's not all of who I am. And so, I love your language of the invitation past the who to the what, because it gets to something bigger. And what's bigger is that we're all vessels of spirit. We're all temples of spirit. We're all instruments of the divine in some way, and we're all connected. It's from my own Christian tradition, it's what the teaching on the Trinity is ultimately pointing to. And yet, so much of our theology around Trinity and so much teaching around Trinity has been pedantic and formulaic. I love Augustine's teaching on the Trinity. He's a North African theologian, sort of the godfather of Western theology. And he simply calls the Trinity um, love, the beloved, and the love that they share.
mm, mm,
So the moment God creates anything at all, right? God didn't have to create anything. It was one of the great questions that the rabbis asked and the theologians and philosophers continue to ask. Why is there anything rather than nothing at all, right? God didn't need to create. But the moment God creates something, there's actually three things. There's God, there's the thing that God created, and then there's the relationship
mm.
between those two things. there's the Trinity. So the Trinity isn't an abstract principle. It's not like an old guy with the beard, a dove, and Jesus. The Trinity is actually the structure of reality,
Mm.
right? Because everything is just infinite triangles. It's infinite relationship. It's right. It's Einstein's in quantum physics discovery, right? Everything that exists is connected to everything else that exists, right? So all of life is relationship.
Yeah, ultimate reality is ultimately relational. Yeah,
Always relational.
yeah, and
Yeah. So it's beautiful because it keeps us from abstraction. It's like, how do you show up in relationship to the humans that you share space and time with, right? And in the spiritual life, it requires a kind of radical honesty to say sometimes I'm not showing up really well. Sometimes I'm over identifying with my role and my identity, or my moment to moment experience. And so there's this lifelong invitation to soften, to welcome, to wake up, and to see the divine in the other. And that sounds beautiful and it's poetic. And it's hard when someone shows up with violence
mm,
and arrogant and impatient. And so, gosh, it takes a lot of compassion and tenderness to be human. And I feel like this is such a big part of my teaching right now. I don't know that I've ever taught so consistently about tenderness. Do you find this in your own thinking right now, Sabri? How is it in the UK where you are? Like, is there the same kind of need for tenderness that I sense here in the States?
absolutely, absolutely yes. And I was talking about it just earlier today, which was to someone that I was coaching, and say, I was speaking about the principle of non-rejection. I say rather, and then I say, can you enter into dialogue with that part, but can you romance it? Can you romance that part with, like, bring it in close? Like, what is that part actually wanting to articulate? So I was using the word like
Ah,
romance earlier, but almost like this invitation to be tender with yourself.
yeah. I can remember reading, gosh, this must be almost 20 years ago now, but Thich Nhat Hanh's book on anger. Thich Nhat Hanh, for those who don't know, the wonderful Zen Vietnamese teacher, probably one of the most tender um, of the Zen teachers of our age, and responsible in so many ways for bringing Zen and Buddhism into the popular conversation. Not the only one, but certainly for me and for many millions of people. Um, and he talked about holding your anger like you would hold a baby,
Mm,
right? A kind of tender caress. And 20 years ago, I thought, oh my God, please, what the hell does that even mean? This is just nonsense. And it took me years of practice to really understand what that kind of tenderness could look like directed at myself, because um, I'd understood from an early time that I wanted to dedicate my life to tenderness toward others.
mm,
I mean, I'd heard the Gospels, particularly stories like the Good Samaritan, Jesus welcoming the stranger, caring for the poor, radical love, uh, uh, entering into relationship with the outcast. I was all there for that. Um, but it never occurred to me that I could offer myself that same compassion and tenderness and love, nor that I would need it. It never occurred to me that that would be a really important part of my healing journey.
mm,
Because what I thought, getting back to the kind of where we started, I thought that what spiritual growth was in those early days, my early 20s, was to go to war with myself, to try to defeat something, to try to kill some part of myself. Um, and because at every other in every other dimension of my life that worked, right? I could work myself up ladders of success. I could beat my body up and have some relative success in sports. I could pull all-nighters and get all sorts of accolades in academic spaces. I could get all sorts of fancy degrees, and I could punish and push my body. But I realized I couldn't do that with my soul. In fact, it was counterproductive. I was falling deeper and deeper into a kind of despair, right? And so only really in the practice of mindfulness that I discovered that I could make peace with myself. Oh, thank goodness I found that.
Yeah, I can really resonate with that. I mentioned before we hit record, but my early 20s, I'd done the whole bodybuilding thing, and that was a response to it. I was a pretty overweight kid. I had like a 42-inch waist when I was 15, and then in my early
Yeah.
20s, I had like a 30-inch waist with a 50-inch chest. So I'd gone the complete opposite direction. At 23, I could bench press. Oh, what is it in American units? Freedom units. I heard someone refer to it as.
Freedom unit.
Um,
Yeah, I won't understand your kilograms or whatever you tell me.
440 pounds.
Oh, yeah, yeah, impressive.
Um, and so, and I was martial arts. I'd train
Yeah.
13 times a week. I just take my
Wow.
body through it and through it. And I'd be doing gymnastics and tumbling and yeah, same thing, like going really hard at it and these really hard like dieting protocols and yeah, it was probably at 27 where I would say I had this big shift and change in direction. And interestingly for me, and I actually want to in a moment backtrack and ask you a little bit more about your
Yeah.
like kind of early years and the calling and
Hmm.
how that unfolded. But for me, I actually always felt this deeper felt sense of something in me. At 12 years old, I started reading Bruce Lee's Tao of Jeet Kune Do, which
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
this philosophical book, and then I kind of started listening to some of the more of the new age spiritual teachers like Wayne Dyer
Oh,
when
sure.
I was 13.
Oh, The
And
Power of Intention changed my life.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
his book, The Power of Intention. Yeah. He was on public television here in the States for a time. It was mind blowing. So a little kid, for me, like on a Saturday afternoon, I would, when the cartoons were over, then Wayne Dyer came on TV. He was from his beautiful place in Hawaii, but teaching about all these spiritual principles. I was just eating it up. I had no idea what it was. I thought, sign me up for that. Oh, I love that we have Wayne Dyer in common. Yeah. What else were you reading?
Yeah, well, so that was like my on ramp, I would say. However, and I felt this yearning for something deeper, but I would have considered myself an atheist until I was 27.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
wasn't brought up. I
Wow.
mean, the UK in large is much more secular, and I wasn't brought up
Sure.
in a religious kind of family. And actually, for me, it was, and it sounds almost cliche saying this now because I feel like everyone who is maybe more leans towards some of the new age spiritual, it's a hot thing. But a decade ago, it was less so. But it's a decade ago when I first journeyed with ayahuasca, and
Uh-huh.
and that night I entered into that as an atheist and came out of it as like of being the. I was like, oh, the God that I didn't believe in doesn't exist, but now I get it. And I just
Yeah.
felt that deep connection. Literally, that one night really changed everything for me. So it was interesting to kind of
Mm.
fast forwards, having never read the Bible, and eventually when I started reading the Book of John, I never saw it through almost like this kind of traditional lens. I was like, this is deeply mystical. I had to
It's
pause
trippy.
every few lines. I was like, whoa, I'm contemplative, like I'm
Yeah.
highlighting and just sitting with a few lines. So to me, I've actually my only um interaction with the like the gospels, for example, have been one of actually viewing through a mystical lens because I didn't
Wow.
have a traditional religious lens to begin with.
Wow. Wow, that's really neat. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, John's gospel, of course, written, as, the latest gospel,
Yeah.
probably around the year 100, depending on how late, you wanna date it, but, a good, 70 years or more after, Jesus dies, and John is receiving stories of Jesus, um orally and infusing this kind of Greek philosophical overlay, but also, some might say a mystical overlay. And yeah, I mean, I oscillate these days. We're not supposed to have favorites, but yeah, John's gospel remains a kind of sublime work for me, especially those opening lines. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was with, right? And then the Word becomes flesh, right? So this bridging humanity and divinity,
Mm.
right? Which is who Jesus is. And, I mean, many different Christians, various, denominations and theologians have different understandings of who Jesus is. Um, Jesus is for me a kind of mirror. It's kind of this radical demonstration of who we are in our fullest humanity, which is, of course, who we also are in our fullest divinity, if we could courageously admit that to ourselves. Because when we discover that, when we know that, when we remember that, then we live differently.
Mm.
And many parts of ourselves are still fearful about living differently. There's many things we don't want to let go. So, I love that you read John in that way. Paul, in some ways, who gets a lot of shade and has been used very violently throughout the day, throughout the centuries to oppress women, oppress various marginalized groups. If you read Paul through a mystical lens, you get a very similar kind of unitive experience. So,
Mm.
gosh, there's much beauty there to discover for sure.
Yeah, yeah, it's very interesting when like I said, because I've only had that experience of it just through my own journey and where I landed, and just seeing this kind of golden thread it feels through, the Bhagavad Gita or the Tao Te Ching, and you see it's like there's this golden thread that sounds so similar, which just feels like it's still just pointing to this similar kind of blueprint or roadmap. But something you said there about Jesus being almost an example of what we can be in
A
our fullest
mirror, yeah.
divinity. Yeah, I, I heard this a few times and it never quite clicked until recently, and then I got it. I think, but that Jesus was the completion of ancient Greek philosophy,
Ah,
pointing to almost there's Plato's tripartite soul, but almost that Christ became the almost rather than being tripartite, being this fourth part, which is to go
ah.
beyond the logistician or the logistician to then this bridge that actually connects us to God. So this bridge to divinity
Mm.
and this path to like finite transcendence. This example of like in my human finitude, there's this path to continuous transcendence of self transcendence. I thought that was quite beautiful when it landed.
Well, yeah, and this is the project of many, let's say, third, fourth, fifth century um, writers in the Christian tradition, is to use the logic and the language and the worldview of Greek philosophy to make sense of and to codify and to systematize the Jesus experience, um, which makes Christianity intelligible to the times, and makes Christianity portable and able to be um, exported throughout the empire. Um, there are certain things that get lost in that project of seeing Jesus as kind of the fulfillment of Greek philosophy. And one of the shadow sides to that project is the split between body and spirit. Right. That we are, I think, in our time beginning now to heal in this really beautiful way. Um, the social media is filled with so many brilliant somatic teachers and folks who are now bridging what for many centuries, at least in Christianity in the West, has been a kind of divide between body and spirit. That uh, this misconception that to go on the sacred journey is to surrender your body, to transcend the body, to hate the body, because the body is a place of sin and ignorance and illusion. Of course, it is that, but it's not only that, right? And so, this integration of shadow and light in the body, back to our paradox again, is the work of integration. And for me, um, I needed to wander through Buddhism
Mm.
to discover that that integration was possible, in general, but also to discover that that integration was in fact possible within my Christian tradition as well, to rediscover the body, to not hate my body,
Mm.
and to not punish it. You know, training is beautiful, right? We all need some kind of training. We all need a kind of embodied learning. Um, but the kind of training, maybe it sounds like the kind of training you were doing, um, was severe, and it was ultimately destructive and not helpful. It sounds like what you've described sort of physically on maybe perhaps unhelpful or overly intense. But for me, the hatred is what was overly intense. I was not
Mm.
training like you were, but I hated myself with a kind of rigorous intensity that I thought was required of me in the spiritual life. Um, and I was heartened slowly over time, working with a spiritual director, working with a therapist, having my own meditation practice, a Zen teacher, taking mindfulness-based stress reduction, the beautiful John Kabat-Zinn formulation of the contemplative life, that I began to soften this side of my perfectionism, which I thought was the main event, right? I thought what life was about was being as perfect and as good as you could. And actually, what I discovered is that the spiritual life was about waking up to love, loving yourself and others, um, as much as you can. And gosh, with that shift, everything shifted in my life. The kind of forcing and pushing and striving. Um, I was able to hold much more loosely because, gosh, I'd climbed, a kind of ladder.
Mm.
Graduated undergrad, and I thought, oh gosh, if I found an Ivy League school, could get into an Ivy League school, then I will have arrived. And I came here to Yale and and um, and graduated, and thought, well, gosh, no, the Ivy League degree couldn't possibly do it, but maybe if I got a doctoral degree, then that longing, then that perfectionism, then that quest, that dis-ease, that not enoughness would go away. And then I finished my doctoral work, and I'll never forget. I came home after graduation. My little daughter said, "Hi, Daddy," and my wife said, "Congratulate Daddy. He just got his doctorate." And she laughed. She said, "It's not like you're a real doctor, Dad. You don't think any of my friends are going to call you Dr. Nappi, right?" I was like, "Oh, right, right, because it's not that, right?" I had attached something to that being Dr. Nappi, and I thought, well, gosh, well, what if I was teaching it like at Yale? Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the shadow of Yale, just a few minutes of here. I was always at the pinnacle. Right? It represented a kind of success. Certainly, it was my own form of idolatry,
Mm.
but it was real. And then when I came here to teach at the university, I went, oh, I think I get it now. Like, this is a game. And it's a game at which even when you win, you always lose. It's never enough. The accomplishments can never satisfy it. And I just started laughing. There was one particular moment where I went, oh, you fool. And it's not that any of this is bad. I love my work. I love my studies. I love the people I've been able to meet, the incredible teachers who came into my life. I love what I'm able to teach others because I've been on this path. And it's a very small part of myself. I'm really thankful that striving energy has shifted. It's not completely gone, of course. I'm a human being, but no, it's much less intense than it was all those years ago.
Yeah, that thank you for sharing that. It really reminds me of where do I place my sense of I? And some people, they're very much identified in their emotions. I am, happy, sad, excited, angry,
Yeah.
frustrated, hungry, and they're pursuing an emotion for their sense of I. Then there's in the mind, it's the concepts, the roles, the labels, and I think that pursuit of more, both of those for me in my own experience has always been they're insatiable. There's an insatiable more. And then that sense of I, when it goes beyond the labels and the idea of me, I'm actually now able to view them and not to. And I think sometimes, some people, again, there's this it's one way or the other. There's this rejection of self, like
Yeah.
the ego needs to die. The amount of times people say to me, "Oh, ego death," I'm like, I mean, good luck. You know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
especially kind of understanding maybe a little bit neurobiologically, or just what the networks of the brain are. That's like, so are you talking about? Like, if you ever had like a really powerful psilocybin experience, that's turning down the default mode network. I mean, I'm not sure how practical that is.
Yeah.
Um, but but rather, like you said earlier in our conversation about holding it more loosely, this idea of me that before seemed so serious and rigid, where it is insatiable. It's like I've found in my own journeys, if I place my eye above that can witness the ideas and the thoughts, and sometimes
Yeah.
laugh at them and be playful with them and catch them in action.
Oh, yeah.
Um, yeah, that was coming up as you shared that. There, this placing of the sense of I.
Well, that's right. Yeah, because I mean, you don't hate yourself to growth. Right? That was what I thought was the fuel for my own growth is hatred. No, it's not a binary. There's a real there's a kind of desire within us that's sacred and holy and that should not be killed or extinguished. This is maybe a bit of a dividing line between at least traditional expressions of Buddhism and Christianity. Right? So the sense of nirvana as the extinguishing, right? Literally, like extinguishing of the candle, right? Is the etymology of this word nirvana. Um, as if your desire could ever fully be distinguished. In the Christian tradition, your own desire is a vestige of your desire for God. That's right. Your desire for anything in this world is simply an expression of your desire for union with God. And so desire in the Christian imagination is to be trained, but trained playfully, delightfully, tenderly. Um, and so, yeah, it's a way of sort of holding that sort of paradox that there's this ego death is really a sort of, well, it's sporadic. It's dying, it's rising, it's dying, it's rising over and over in tiny little ways, um, until until you are deified, right? In the Eastern Orthodox Christian tradition, there's this notion that we're deified upon death, which I really like that. In the West, we're not bold enough to use that language, but I aspire to it. And of course, when we're talking about this sort of the little me, the little me that needs to feel important, that needs to be different. Henry Nouwen had this beautiful way of naming. Do you know this name, Henry Nouwen? Oh gosh, one of my favorite spiritual guides, beloved teachers, Catholic priest, died in the late 90s. He taught at Harvard and at Notre Dame and here at Yale Divinity School. I'm sort of honored to know that and I walk through the halls that he even walked through. Gay man and one of the most prolific and wise spiritual writers in the English language in the 20th century. And he said there are 5 lies of identity. And he said, the lies are, and is given to us by popular culture and largely capitalism. I am what I do. I am what I have. I am what other people think of me. And all of those 3 would be bad enough, but these last 2, I think, at least for me, are the heaviest to bear. They elicit the most shame response, I think, in me and in others. Number 4, I'm nothing more than my worst moment. And then for anyone who struggles with perfectionism or achievement, this 5th one might actually be the most bitter. And that is, I'm not allowed to be anything less than my best moment. And I tell you, Sabri, as I walk around Yale, especially in the first weeks of school when I'm working with our new students, this drive to be excellent and fabulous and brilliant and to speak in conversations with 25 footnotes that reference how much we know and other thinkers and authors and philosophers, and just to this hustling for your worth, as Brene Brown said. I love the way she's coined this. This is a desperation to demonstrate how important you are. Gosh, those illusions are real. And look, I don't know that we ever fully disidentify with them. So can we just be gracious with those parts of ourselves that are still somewhat attached, right? It's the kindness, it's the gentleness that you're naming. It's the, can we be more gracious with ourselves and with others? This is, again, so much a part of my invitation right now as I'm teaching and just showing up in digital spaces to say, like, gosh, we can disagree profoundly, but can we be gracious with each other? And I don't know, maybe it starts with being gracious toward ourselves, because if we can't be gracious toward ourselves, how are we ever going to be gracious across these real expansive divides that we find ourselves living with, at least here in the States, for sure.
Yeah, it really feels like the mind's need to understand is the barrier to love. And what we don't understand we can't love. And I just feel like if we could just turn that around, and really that was the invitation of Jesus for me.
Yeah.
Can we love each other? Because actually, if we can love each other, it becomes a lot easier to understand if love
Yes.
is the thing that we enter in with first. And
Yeah.
it's worth sharing in the first, I would guess, because time becomes a little bit skewed in ayahuasca. But in my first journey, one of the things I experienced really early on was, bearing in mind at this point in my life, I'd never done a recreational drug. So I'd
Mm,
never had, apart from, if we're going to include alcohol, but apart from alcohol, I'd not experienced a state altering substance. And early on, these two demonic entities enter, and
yeah.
I'm like, oh, okay, my eyes are closed, and I think, oh, this isn't nice. Let me open my eyes, and they're still there. So that's even worse. and and
Mm,
my first impulse, a martial artist in me, was I need to fight these. So all of a sudden,
yes.
everything around me changes. I mean, this like arena to fight them. And then right before that began, I just had this moment of awareness that what made them appear to be demonic, I was seeing their pain. And then I realized, oh, I need to love them.
Yes.
And then I offered them love and they just went, psh, they floated away.
Yes.
And there's this narration of a voice that said, anytime someone appears to be evil or demonic, you're always seeing their pain. And their pain is from a time where they needed love and didn't receive it.
Mm,
And love is the ultimate currency. So love them.
yes.
And that really stuck with me. That really
Yeah.
stuck with me.
Beautiful. It's beautiful. I practiced the Japanese martial art Ki Aikido for 3 years. And of course, in Ki Aikido, there's no hitting or punching. The Ki Aikido is perhaps the most peaceful form of martial art, in which you're merging with your attacker. And Ki Aikido has two primary goals. The first goal is to keep yourself safe, and the second goal is to keep your attacker
Mm-hmm.
safe. Right? It's to love the person who's coming at you with anger and violence. Um, and a special shout out to my beautiful Aikido sensei, Mort Melman, who said, in response to a lot of the internet chatter, that Aikido isn't a real martial art, right? Because it's not one of the hard martial arts. If you Google Aikido online, you'll see a lot of this banter, like, hey, if I approach you with a gun, what's your Aikido gonna do? And he used to say, um, I don't practice Aikido to stop the gunman. I practice Aikido so I don't become the
Mm.
gunman. Right? um, and I think I think your articulation of love is absolutely on the mark. And the only thing that I want to add to it, because it was so beautiful, you're inspiring me to lean into this Christian teaching, and that is that love always comes at some kind of cost. You know, with what Paul or Jesus would call the cross. Um, there's always a cost to your popularity. That you'll have to have a metanoia. You'll have to change something. You'll lose, you lose popularity. You might have to let go of some of the things that once brought you comfort. Um, you may look odd or strange. You're going to get infinite amounts back. But love is always going to require losing something or paying some kind of price. Effort, right? It takes a lot of effort to care about the world. Um, right? The reason why our social fabric is fraying is because it's hard to care. It's heartbreaking to care. And and so in my teaching, I also want to be radically honest about what's called for. It's not enough just to say, oh, I want to love the world, or we're all sort of mystically united. It's your heart's going to be broken when you love like this. But your heart's an infinite heart, right? Because you have God's heart beating inside, right? So there's the paradox. But if you don't want to have your heart broken, don't try to love anything, because that's the cost. At least that's sort of the Christian way of naming this. If you love the world, you will be crucified at some point. And that's the paradox, and that's the life that, at least in Christian language, that we've been invited to. But it's really common to talk about the upside of the spiritual life without that very real cost or shadow side, however we want to name that, right? It's gosh, it's the easiest bypass. And I mean, we get it, right? Who would want to pay the cost? Who would want to have some hardship? Who would want to have your heart broken? You know, many times I want to armor up
Mm.
and protect, except the thing that you're protecting is infinite and unbreakable. So you you don't need to protect it. Um, but it's a powerful paradox, and I get why people might hold that with some fear.
Yeah, and just to add another thread to that paradox, as you said that,
Yeah,
of if you don't want to have your heart broken, don't love, I think is what you said.
yeah,
Yet it seems like the most heartbreaking thing you can do is not to love.
yeah. Right, because because it violates your nature. Right. Of all the things that I see repeated in my teaching by other people, things get shared on social media. It's just very sweet and humbling that anything I say might be helpful to anyone else other than myself. Um, is that you are what happens when love gets a body. Right? That's the deepest identity. Uh, right? God is love. That's the one of the foundational Christian insights. God is love, and you are simply what happens when God creates a body and then pours God's spirit into it. And we have this language in, I mean, certainly in the Gospels and in letters of John, but also the very first moment from the book of Genesis, when God is creating the universe. The way that God creates the universe is to breathe. And everything comes out of nothing through the ruach,
Mm.
the breath of God, right? So we are just sort of vessels for love and the very spirit of God. And of course, this word spirit just comes to us from Latin. It's a translation of the Greek word pneuma, which means spirit, which means
Right.
breath, right? All we're talking about here is the divine breath. We're simply vessels of the divine breath. And to not know that and to not live from that continuity with the divine it's to suffer.
Yeah.
It's to live in ignorance. It's to hate parts of yourself. It's to live in constant desire, never enoughness. And so much of our world is living from that place right now, which is
Mm.
why we see the levels of violence, despair, anxiety, suicide multiplying.
Yeah, it really feels like this fear and contraction leads to this kind of existential crisis. But to your point, this if we are love, how many people are split off from being what they are? And Brendan, recently I was a couple of months ago really going through a relationship breakup, and one of the things I was saying to my friend is that in the pain of it, I said the most difficult part was in the pain of it. I'd actually be not intentionally, but I feel like I couldn't locate the love that I usually really feel
Mm.
and embody. It's like the pain I'd almost shut off, and I was trying to locate it, but I was actually struggling. And I was saying the hardest thing about this is in some way my body has almost shut down as a way of making this more bearable in a way.
Yes.
And then I sense I actually need us to fall back in love with the person I was separating from, because that's actually the truth, is that I love her madly. And in that, I opened again, and I was able to then find peace with that
Mm.
chapter and hold it with deep reverence. And it was such a blessing and an honor to have had that. But the most true thing was, and I think sometimes people think this, to move on means to almost disconnect. And that was actually hurting me the most. So, oh no, I need
Ah.
to fall back in love and hold that. I can honor this chapter. And that's now, I now enter into a new one. But that, I felt like I returned to the truth of my being. And I just wanted to share that because that
Ah.
was a recent
Yeah, yeah, thank you.
lived experience. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. No, this is a beautiful example of that, right? The truth, what Jesus taught, right? The truth will set you free. It will also bring some form of suffering, right, into your life. And that's okay, right? It's okay to feel pain, especially connected to love, of course. There's Richard Rohr would always describe, there's two paths to transformation. There's the path of love, which is reserved, it seems, for the few, and there's the path of pain. Most of our growth, most of the kind of exponential growth that we experience in life happens through pain. But oftentimes these things are together, the pain and the love. In fact, when I teach, at the end of my class, I hand out a little heart, and on one side of the heart is engraved. I had these made for my students. Deep love. And on the other side of the heart is engraved deep pain.
Mm.
And I said, as a spiritual teacher and leader, your role is to hold both of these things as fully as you can.
Mm.
The world needs you to bear witness that actually you can hold your pain courageously with love. And then, of course, there's so much love and beauty and wonder and delight in the world as well. And we need you to point to the many trillions of examples of love and delight and wonder and beauty still here in our world, even amid all the pain. You have to be able to do both, right? Because to be a spiritual teacher is to hold those paradoxes. And I love that in your experience, you were holding both, right? The sweetness of that love and the pain of change. It's all a kind of letting go or grief practice, right? And this takes me back to my Buddhist training, right? Because it's all going away. Every moment it's passing away. We're trying to hold on to it. And yet it's all passing away. But in the Zen monastery, at the end of every night, they chant the evening gatha. And the evening gatha is this powerful, stern reminder of impermanence. And it's a bit long, but this one line, the first time I heard it, kicked me in the face. And it says something like, as of tonight, your days on this earth have been subtracted by one. do not squander your life.
Mm.
And so we show up the best we can for each moment, with love, with the pain, with the full catastrophe, as John Kabat-Zinn named his book, right? With the whole enchilada, right? To hold the whole thing. That's all we're ever trying to do, right? This great spectrum of experience, and to trust somehow that it's all holy,
Yeah.
and that we have, with this infinite mystery we name as God, that we have the kind of presence and courage to hold it all.
Yeah, the holy and the broken hallelujah.
Oh, there it is. It's everything, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Brandon, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and there was so much I wanted to ask you uh, about your journey leading to this point, and I feel like I got so lost in the conversation. I've just noticed the time, and
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
one time maybe we can do another one at some point because I felt there's so much more, and I just want to say it's really. It's great to know that there are people like yourself teaching in, you know, universities like Yale, and I can imagine for the people that do find themselves in an Ivy League school where there can be so much of that pressure where they place on themselves and from
Mhm.
maybe parents, and to have someone like you that is present in there with the not just the message that you teach, but that in which you embody, which really is this invitation to tenderness. I think it's really, really wonderful.
Oh, thank you for making this space. And it's gosh, it's heartening to know that there's some other souls in the world sharing the same path, and we light the way for one another. I mean, that's how it works. We shine light for one another, and it's an honor to be connected. And I look forward to many years and days of connection and learning from each other.
Yeah, more God to come, as one of my
More
teachers,
to come.
Dr. Gaffney says, more God to come. Beautiful.
Beautiful.
Brandon, where would be the best place for people to find you that would like to learn more about you and your offerings and to follow you?
Thank you. Well, I'm most active on Instagram, Brandon.Nappi, where I'm teaching a number of times a week and sharing those truths that are closest to my heart. And so find me there. And BrandonNappi.com is a place where you can also find my writing and learn a little bit more about what I do. I certainly do lots of one-on-one work with folks and spiritual guidance and what's sometimes called spiritual direction. I work with people from all walks of life to support them as they discover their soul's deepest longing.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for this. It's been truly delightful, and yeah, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. So thank you once again.
Thanks so very much.